Welcome to A1 Storyteller, the channel where gripping stories come to life. Stories that will make you think, reflect, and most importantly, ignite change. Tonight we bring you a chilling tale that unfolds in the blink of an eye. A story where the lines between law enforcement, justice, and human decency blur in the most shocking way. Imagine a world where a simple night out for a doctor, someone who's dedicated his life to saving others, turns into a terrifying nightmare, and an innocent man becomes the victim of a violent act that will ripple through the very foundation of society. Dr. Jamal Harris, a highly respected black trauma surgeon, never imagined that after a long shift at the hospital, he'd be caught in a life-or-death encounter with the police. But when Officer Bradley Connor, a white cop known for his aggression, made a call that would change everything, Dr. Harris found himself at the mercy of a vicious K-9 and an officer whose intentions were anything but just. In this shocking story, we'll follow Jamal's harrowing ordeal from the moment the attack begins, through the devastating aftermath, to the incredible fight for justice that ensues. As we dive deep into this real-world nightmare, you'll witness not only the brutal violence that unfolds, but also the overwhelming power of the public's outcry and the tireless pursuit of justice. This story is about more than just one man's struggle. It's about a nation grappling with the very essence of what it means to protect and serve, and what happens when that trust is broken. So sit back, hold tight, and prepare for an emotional roller coaster. The story you're about to hear is one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about right and wrong. Welcome to A1 Storyteller, where the truth is revealed and the unexpected always happens. Dr. Jamal Harris had never been one to shy away from a challenge. As a highly respected trauma surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital, he had faced countless life-or-death situations, his hands steady even when faced with the most catastrophic injuries. But tonight was different. It wasn't the usual chaos of a hospital emergency room or a high-stakes surgery that weighed heavily on his mind as he walked out of the hospital doors. No, tonight was different because tonight, Jamal's life was about to be turned upside down. The night air was cool against his face as he stepped onto the sidewalk, the noise of the city humming softly in the background. Jamal breathed in deeply, letting the cold air refresh his senses. It had been a long 16-hour shift, and while he was exhausted, he felt the usual sense of pride that came with saving lives. But there was something else, a gnawing feeling of unease, as if the city had changed in some fundamental way that he couldn't quite grasp. The thought flickered in his mind before he shook it off. His car was parked just a couple of blocks away, and he knew the walk would give him a moment of quiet before heading home to the warmth of his apartment. Jamal loved the peace of the night. He could walk through the streets of the city without much thought, his mind still replaying the surgeries he had done earlier in the day. He'd been up for hours, but as a surgeon his body was trained for long shifts and staying sharp even when fatigue crept in. But as he walked, his thoughts started to wander. He thought about his patients, especially the young girl he had saved that afternoon. He thought about his family who were so proud of him and his accomplishments. He thought about his father, a man who had always emphasized the importance of giving back to others. He wanted to make him proud, be the kind of man who left a legacy of healing and hope. It was then that Jamal noticed something that would change his life forever. The flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser reflecting off the buildings ahead. At first, it didn't register in his mind, but as he drew closer, the police car slowed down and came to a stop right beside him. Jamal's heart skipped a beat as he instinctively tensed, sensing something was wrong. A voice cut through the air, harsh and commanding. A soft hiss, sensing something was wrong. You! Hands where I can see them! Jamal froze. His first instinct was to keep calm, to not escalate whatever situation this might be. He was used to tense encounters. Being a black man in a city like this, he had faced his share of misunderstandings. But this felt different. He had done nothing wrong. He glanced at the officer who had called out to him. Officer Bradley Connor, A tall, broad-shouldered man with dark sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. Connor had a reputation that preceded him in the precinct. Known for his aggressive behavior and questionable methods, Connor had made a name for himself as an officer who didn't hesitate to use force when the situation suited him. Jamal's pulse quickened. He could see the officer's hand near his holster, ready to draw. Connor's K-9, a muscular German shepherd named Titan, growled in the backseat of the patrol car, its teeth visible as it barked furiously. The dog's snarls were chilling, but Jamal did his best to ignore the primal fear it instilled in him. He had dealt with more dangerous situations than this. He was a doctor, after all. But in that moment, his medical training didn't feel like it would help him. "Officer, is there a problem?" Jamal asked, his voice calm but firm. "You fit the description of a suspect," Connor barked, his eyes scanning Jamal's hospital scrubs and his hospital badge clipped to the fabric. Jamal could feel his breath quicken, but he kept his composure. "I'm a doctor," he said, raising his hand slowly in the air, showing Connor his badge. "I just finished my shift at the hospital." He was expecting the officer to understand. After all, the hospital was a mere 2 blocks away. What was the likelihood that he was being mistaken for someone else? But Connor's eyes didn't soften. Instead, they hardened as he took a step closer to Jamal, his grip tightening around the baton that hung from his belt. "Turn around and get on your knees," Connor ordered, his voice no longer carrying the slightest hint of reason. Jamal's heart raced now, but he stood his ground. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and he wasn't going to be intimidated into submission without cause. "I'm not resisting," he said, his voice steady even as the air grew thick with tension. He thought about his family, his career, and everything he had worked so hard for. There was no reason for him to be treated this way. But the officer wasn't listening. Connor's hand moved, and before Jamal could react, the officer barked a single word that would forever haunt him. "Attack!" Titan, the K-9, leaped from the back seat with terrifying speed, its body rocketing towards Jamal. Before he could even think to shield himself, the dog's jaws locked onto his arm, biting down with unrelenting force. Pain shot through Jamal's entire body as he screamed out in agony, trying desperately to free himself. His arm felt as though it was being crushed under the dog's sheer power. He dropped to the ground, his vision blurring as the blood seeped from his wound, soaking through his scrubs. "Call him off," Jamal pleaded, but Connor didn't budge. The officer stood still, watching as his dog tore into the black doctor's flesh. The pain was unbearable. Jamal's body went into shock, and he felt himself slipping in and out of consciousness. His thoughts scattered as the world around him began to fade. His last conscious thought was a desperate one. "Please, don't let this be the end." Chapter 2, a routine walk turned nightmare. The pain was unbearable. Dr. Jamal Harris's arm felt as though it had been ripped from his body, and every second that passed only amplified the agony. His head swam, and he could hear the distant shouts of bystanders in the background, but none of it felt real. The world seemed to have gone dark around him, his body barely registering the violence that was happening. Titan's growl reverberated in his chest as the K-9 sank its teeth deeper into Jamal's flesh. The officer, Connor, remained eerily still, watching the attack unfold with a strange sense of detachment. It was as if Jamal's screams were nothing more than background noise to him, drowned out by the gnashing of teeth and the sound of his dog's bark. Jamal's vision blurred, and he couldn't keep himself upright any longer. His knees buckled beneath him, sending him crashing to the ground with a harsh thud. The dog's weight on his arm only made it worse. He tried to pry Titan off, but the more he struggled, the more the K-9 latched onto him. "Somebody help!" a woman screamed from the crowd. She was frantically waving her arms, her phone already recording. Other voices joined in, shouts of disbelief and panic filling the air, but still Connor did nothing. His eyes remained cold, locked onto Jamal, a sinister silence surrounding him. Jamal's vision faded in and out, and his thoughts grew increasingly muddled. The blood loss was starting to cloud his mind. The faces of his family flashed before his eyes, the faces of those he had promised to protect with his work. But right now there was no one to protect him. "Please, stop," Jamal whispered hoarsely, but it was like the words had no meaning. The dog kept gnawing at his arm, and he had no strength left to fight back. As his world blurred to blackness, Jamal's last thought was of his little sister, Maya, and how he would never get to see her again. He could hear a faint ringing in his ears as the sounds of the world around him seemed to fade away completely. The world had gone quiet. The pain, the noise, everything seemed like it was happening from a distance. Jamal's body was numb and his mind was barely clinging to consciousness. The K-9's sharp teeth were still latched onto his arm, but the pain had dulled to a constant throb, as if his senses had given up trying to register the attack. His body was shutting down, and the fight for survival felt like it was slipping away with each passing moment, but the silence didn't last long. In the distance, Jamal could hear sirens, faint at first, but growing closer. He tried to focus on the sound, but his eyelids were too heavy to lift. The cold concrete under his back felt like the only thing anchoring him to reality. But that anchor was about to be yanked away. Connor's voice broke the silence. It was sharp, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment to happen. "Call him off, now!" someone shouted. It was another officer rushing to the scene, but Jamal couldn't see who it was, his vision swimming in a haze of pain. Then Connor's voice rang out again, louder this time and full of authority. "Attack!" It wasn't the command to stop, it was another order, another instruction. And just like that, everything Jamal knew about authority and justice came crashing down. The officer didn't shout "stop" or "release" or any of the commands that would have suggested an intervention. Instead, Connor had given an order for the attack to continue. The K-9's grip tightened. Jamal couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had been assaulted, savaged by a dog trained for defense. But he hadn't done anything to provoke this. He wasn't resisting, he wasn't fleeing, he had simply been walking home after a shift. And now, as his arm was being shredded, Connor wasn't just allowing it to happen, he was actively encouraging it. The police officer, rather than intervening to save an innocent man from the attack of a vicious dog, was ensuring that the K-9 continued its assault. Jamal's heart raced in disbelief, and a wave of confusion overwhelmed him. "Stop! I'm telling you, I'm not the guy you think I am!" Jamal screamed, though his voice came out weak and hoarse. His breath was shallow, the air around him turning thick with panic. But Connor's face remained cold and stoic. It was as though nothing, no amount of pain or fear in Jamal's voice, could penetrate the officer's indifference. There was no attempt at de-escalation, no sign of concern for the man writhing beneath the dog. A few moments later, another officer arrived at the scene. He was younger, his face flushed with a mix of urgency and disbelief. He rushed over to Jamal, trying to pull the dog off. The K-9 growled and resisted, but after a few seconds, the younger officer managed to get tightened to release its grip. The dog's body pulled back reluctantly, leaving Jamal's torn arm exposed to the night air. Blood oozed from the wound, staining his clothes, the sidewalk, and his hopes of ever walking again without this traumatic memory haunting him. "Jesus Christ," the younger officer murmured, kneeling beside Jamal. His hands hovered over the doctor's body, unsure of what to do. The woman who had been recording the incident on her phone ran forward, shouting at the officer, "Why didn't you stop him sooner? Why did he have to do this?" Jamal couldn't respond. His mind was spiraling into unconsciousness. His body wasn't his own anymore. It was a raw, mangled thing struggling to hold on. His chest heaved with every strained breath, but his body was too weak to fight any longer. Then, the faint sound of an ambulance siren reached his ears. It was growing louder, and Jamal's heart gave a weak flutter. Relief, it seemed, had finally come. But, as the paramedics rushed to the scene and began administering first aid, the damage had already been done. Jamal's life would never be the same again. The deep wounds left by Titan's attack weren't just physical, they were emotional, they were psychological, and they had been inflicted by someone whose job was supposed to be to protect, not to harm. As Jamal was loaded into the ambulance, the woman who had been recording the entire ordeal posted the video online. Within minutes, the footage went viral. People around the country, and eventually the world, watched in horror as the brutality unfolded. Jamal had become the focal point of a national outcry, a symbol of the broken system in place, a system that allowed the unjustified use of force, a system that allowed a man to be assaulted for no reason other than his presence on the street. Chapter 3. The battle for justice begins. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a heavy thud, and the paramedics inside worked quickly but gently as they tended to Dr. Jamal Harris. The lights of the ambulance flickered above him, casting eerie shadows on the cold, sterile walls. His body ached in ways he had never felt before. Wounds from the K-9's attack throbbing relentlessly, his arm barely recognizable beneath the gashes. His heart raced, not only from the physical pain but from a gnawing fear of the future. How had things gone so horribly wrong? Jamal's head was spinning, and the sounds around him seemed muffled and distant. The paramedics worked swiftly, but their faces were full of concern. One was administering an IV, while the other applied pressure to his arm to stop the bleeding. Despite their efforts, Jamal couldn't stop the feeling of his life slipping away. His breath became shallow, and he could feel the darkness closing in on him again. "Stay with me, Dr. Harris," one of the paramedics, a young woman, said firmly, her voice cutting through the fog that clouded his thoughts. "Stay with us." Jamal tried to speak, tried to tell her that he was more than just a doctor now, he was a victim, but the words wouldn't come. His throat felt tight, and his vision was blurring again. As the ambulance sped down the streets of the city, Jamal's mind started to drift, images flashing in his mind, his patients, his family, the life he had built, and it all felt so fragile, like a house of cards ready to collapse. As Jamal's condition worsened, his thoughts began to cloud. He was no longer just a surgeon trying to heal. Now he was a man struggling to survive an unimaginable ordeal. The fear that had taken root earlier began to blossom into something more powerful. Anger. The anger of being wrongfully attacked. The anger of being targeted by the very people who were supposed to protect him. When the ambulance finally arrived at the hospital, Jamal was rushed into surgery. The lights above flickered as medical teams worked with urgency, doing everything they could to stabilize him. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity to Jamal, who remained unconscious through it all. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the viral video of the attack continued to spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with outrage. News outlets began picking up the story, broadcasting it on television, and people from all walks of life were expressing their disgust and disbelief. In a matter of hours, Jamal had become a symbol of the systemic abuse of power, of police brutality, and of racial injustice. Protests broke out across the city in support of Jamal. Demonstrators gathered outside the police precinct, demanding answers. The police were quick to act, but it was clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. The public outcry was deafening, with people calling for accountability from Officer Bradley Connor, the officer who had given the orders that led to the attack. Jamal's family was notified of the incident as soon as he was stabilized. His sister, Maya, was the first to arrive at the hospital. She had been one of the first to see the viral video and had instantly feared the worst. Now, seeing her brother in a hospital bed, unconscious and bruised, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The strong, confident man who had always protected her was now the one in need of protection. Maya refused to leave Jamal's side. She held his hand tightly, her tears falling freely as she whispered words of encouragement. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, rage, confusion, but above all, determination. She would make sure that what happened to her brother would not go unnoticed. The world needed to know the truth, and she would fight to make sure justice was served. Back at the police precinct, Officer Bradley Connor was beginning to feel the weight of the public scrutiny. The viral video of the attack had flooded every corner of the internet, and with each passing hour, more people began to question his actions. His colleagues were growing uneasy, whispers of discontent circulating among them. Even those who had once supported him were beginning to distance themselves. The case had become a public relations nightmare for the department, and the pressure was mounting. Inside Connor's small office, the phone rang incessantly. He didn't answer. He was pacing back and forth, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He couldn't believe what had happened. What had started as an ordinary routine stop had spiraled out of control, and now he was at the center of a controversy that threatened everything he had worked for. The attack had been justified in his mind. Jamal had fit the description of a suspect, and when he resisted, it was Connor's duty to ensure control of the situation. But now, looking back on it, the reality of his actions was becoming clear. The video, caught by a bystander and seen by millions, painted a different picture. Officer Connor's phone rang again, and this time he answered. The voice on the other end was his captain, a gruff man who had been one of Connor's biggest supporters. "Connor?" The captain's voice came through, stern and direct. "You've got a lot of people asking questions. You need to get your story straight now." Connor's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to steady his nerves. "The whole damn department is under fire," the captain snapped. "The video's everywhere. You're not just in trouble with the public, we're getting pressure from above. People want answers, Connor." Connor sank into his chair, his head spinning. "I did my job," he muttered, though even to himself, it didn't sound convincing. "I followed procedure. The guy was resisting. He could have been dangerous." "You're missing the point," the captain interrupted. "There's no justification for this. It looks bad, real bad. We're going to have to take action, Connor. You might be suspended." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Suspended. The very thing he had worked so hard for, his career, was now in jeopardy. "I didn't do anything wrong," Connor said, his voice breaking. He had no idea what was coming for him or how the situation would unfold, but one thing was clear. His life, and the lives of those around him, were about to change forever. Outside the precinct, the protests intensified. What had started as a local issue was quickly gaining national attention. The public was demanding justice for Jamal Harris, and they were not willing to back down. The hashtag Justice for Jamal was trending, and every moment brought more pressure on the police department to act. Inside his office, Officer Connor's future grew increasingly uncertain. He had never thought things would spiral out of control like this, but with every passing minute it became clearer. There would be no going back. The following days were a blur of media frenzy and public outcry. Jamal's condition stabilized, but the emotional and physical toll of the attack weighed heavily on him. While he remained unconscious, his family was in constant communication with his doctors, praying for a miracle. Maya, his sister, refused to leave his side. Every day she sat by his bed, holding his hand and speaking to him, hoping her words would reach him, even if he couldn't respond. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the situation had escalated. The protests had gone from small demonstrations to full-blown rallies. People gathered in large numbers, chanting Jamal's name, demanding justice. They marched to the police precinct, calling for Officer Connor's resignation, even his arrest. The city was on the brink of unrest, with tensions running high. The video that had gone viral was a powerful catalyst, revealing the brutal attack and sparking outrage. Detective Laura Hayes was assigned to lead the investigation into the incident. A seasoned officer with a no-nonsense attitude, she had seen countless cases of police brutality, but this one hit her differently. Jamal's story was not just about an innocent man being attacked. It was about the systematic abuse of power that had plagued the police force for years. Hayes was determined to get to the truth, no matter where it led. As she reviewed the footage, she noticed something strange. Connor had hesitated before releasing the dog, but it was clear from the way he ordered the K-9 to attack that there had been no reasonable justification. He had failed to assess the situation properly, choosing to escalate the confrontation rather than de-escalate it. The more Hayes dug, the more she realized that the incident was part of a larger pattern. Connor had a history of aggressive behavior and excessive force complaints against him. His previous record had been swept under the rug by his superiors, but now, with public pressure mounting, his past was coming back to haunt him. Hayes knew that exposing the truth could cost her everything. The police department was powerful, and Connor had allies who would do whatever it took to protect him. But she also knew that this was bigger than just one officer. The public had demanded justice, and she was not going to stand by and let it slip away. As the investigation into Officer Connor's actions grew more intense, the walls around him began to close in. His colleagues who had once praised him were now avoiding him, their whispers echoing in every corner of the precinct. He could feel the eyes on him wherever he went, the once friendly faces now turned cold and distant. Even the captain, who had been his strongest ally, no longer returned his calls. Connor had tried to justify his actions, repeatedly telling himself that he had been following protocol, that Jamal had resisted and needed to be controlled. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. The public backlash, the protests, the viral video, it was all too much. And now, with Detective Hayes leading the investigation, Connor's fate was all but sealed. He spent sleepless nights in his small apartment, pacing back and forth, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. His future, his career, everything he had worked for seemed to be slipping away. The weight of the truth was crushing him, but there was one thing he couldn't deny. He had made a grave mistake. One night, as Connor sat in the darkness of his living room, his phone rang. The captain's name appeared on the screen. "Connor," the captain said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." Connor knew that this was it, the end of the road. The captain wasn't calling to offer support, he was calling to deliver the verdict. "I'm done, aren't I?" Connor's voice was barely a whisper, his throat tight with emotion. "We've reviewed the case," the captain said. "The department is cutting ties with you. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. It's over." Connor felt his stomach drop. It was the moment he had dreaded, the moment he had been trying to avoid. His career as a police officer was over, and with it the remnants of his life as he knew it. But even as the reality of his downfall hit him, something gnawed at his conscience. He had never truly realized how far gone things were until it was too late. As the investigation reached its climax, the pressure on the police department grew unbearable. Detective Hayes' findings were damning. She had compiled a solid case against Officer Connor, backed by the evidence of excessive force, his history of complaints, and the irrefutable footage of the attack on Jamal. It was clear that Connor had violated every principle of policing, and the public was demanding accountability. Jamal, still in a medically induced coma, had no idea that the battle for his justice was being waged in the streets and the courtroom, but Maya was determined to see it through. She became the voice for her brother, speaking out at every opportunity, sharing Jamal's story with the media, demanding that the officer who had nearly taken his life be held accountable. One evening, as the protests reached their peak, a statement was released from the police department. Officer Bradley Connor was officially terminated. The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. The news outlets covered the development, and for the first time in what felt like forever, people felt a glimmer of hope. Justice had been served, but there was still so much more to be done. Connor was facing a criminal trial, and the legal system would decide whether he would face charges for his actions. But for now, the city could breathe a collective sigh of relief. Maya stood in front of the press, tears in her eyes but a fierce determination in her voice. "This is just the beginning," she said, her words echoing through the crowd. "My brother may never be the same, but we will fight for justice every step of the way. We will make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else." And with that, the fight for Jamal's justice entered its next chapter. The battle was far from over, but the first victory had been won. Outro. The road to justice continues. The story of Dr. Jamal Harris is one of pain, perseverance, and hope. What began as an ordinary day turned into an unimaginable nightmare. But Jamal's family, the public, and countless supporters refused to let his story be forgotten. Justice was served, but the fight for reform, for a world where police brutality is no longer tolerated, was just beginning. Jamal's journey was far from over, and the road to recovery would be long, but with every protest, every legal victory, and every voice raised in unity, the world took another step closer to real change. Officer Connor's downfall was just one piece of the puzzle. There were many more battles to fight, but Jamal's story had ignited something much bigger, something that would not be easily silenced. As the story unfolds, the world watches, ready to see if true justice will prevail. And as for Jamal, he remains a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a better tomorrow. Thank you for joining us on this journey through A1 Storyteller. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Your voice matters in the fight for justice, and together we can create a world where no one ever has to face the horrors that Jamal did. Stay tuned for more powerful stories, and remember, change starts with us.